Hi everybody, this is Dan Stolbarger and welcome to this week's Middle East update. It's the week of September 11th, and I have to say right from the get-go, make sure you get the PDF PowerPoint for this week's YouTube presentation because I'm trying to squeeze it all down to that 10-minute period of time, and there's so much information this week. I know I'm going to have to skip over some things, so make sure you grab that. And you can get that at our website at holygroundexplorations.com, or there's probably a link on the YouTube channel itself. So let's jump in right away and take a look at what's transpiring this week. We always start with our news bites, and we got 3 or 4 of them. Again, amazing things that are happening in Israel with this so-called normalization, the Abrahamic Accord. The new Bahrain policy is to allow flights between Israel and the United Arab Emirates to cross in its airspace. Now, not only Bahrain, but Saudis, all of these different countries are coming on board. This is a significant step towards this so-called normalization. With that being said, the other side of the coin, whether it's the Palestinians, the leadership there, or Iran or Turkey, they basically are describing this as a catastrophe. And so we're going to find that it's just going to go back and forth. Now, as far as ethnic cleansing goes, Hamas is saying that the Jews have defiled the Temple Mount, and they're demanding no more Jewish presence, and it needs a ceremonial cleansing. Remember, the Jewish High Holy Days are coming up beginning around September 13th or 18th. I'll get to that in a second. The bottom line is that there are threats around this particular time, so we'll have to keep our eyes open there. A sermon by one of Saudi Arabia's top religious leaders appears to call for normalization ties with Israel. In Mecca, the Grand Mosque, the Imam there, spoke concerning this normalization. So, I mean, these are significant building blocks that are being put together. Now, we're in this article here today, we're going to talk about 3 other states or countries that are coming on board that are moving their embassies. Kosovo, Serbia, as well as Chad want to open diplomatic missions in Israel, in Jerusalem, within a year. And then finally, when we talk about the craziness of this world, Palestinian leaders are describing the plans by Israel to install wheelchair access to the Tomb of the Patriots, Machpelah in Hebron, as tantamount to igniting a religious war in the region, in the world, and declaring this a war crime. Go figure. Okay, let's continue through the main articles for this week. The IDF is prepping for war. I mentioned the High Holy Days. That date is actually September 18th, the evening of the 18th. And the IDF is estimating, preparing, believing that Hezbollah will try to attack Israel or Israeli troops before the Jewish holiday. So a lot going on, especially up north. The IDF admits it doesn't know whether it will be a rocket attack or infiltration of a terror cell or a sniper attack. But because the high holidays are less than about a week away, we want to keep our eyes on this. Now, the whole United Arab Emirates thing and the Arab coalition or whatever, I found this article interesting that the UAE is actually speaking out. Their deputy police chief, probably butcher his name, but Halil Kafan Tamim, goes on record basically to say, you know what, we're sick and tired of all this rhetoric from the Palestinians. If Abbas was a worthy leader, he would have resolved the Palestinian problem by now or simply resigned. And what we're getting, this is a sense of major dissatisfaction with many of the major Arab countries. How could public opinion in the Gulf states be expected to favor the Palestinians when they pray for the destruction of these countries and their mosque? He then addressed the Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, directly saying, Haniyeh, when you are being hostile to the Saudis and when you open your arms to Iran, who do you think you are? Go to Iran, let them help you, and then excuse the language, he ends by just saying, go to hell. And this is the rhetoric that is coming out. So you can see the cracks in the so-called unity of the Arab nations in regards to the Palestinians. In response to all of this, Hamas is rattling their sabers. Ismail Haniyeh, once again, he's touring a refugee camp, Palestinian refugee camp, and during a speech that he's given there, here's his threat. We are now able to bomb Tel Aviv and beyond Tel Aviv. And again, this is not being contested. We know the amount of rockets that have been shipped not only to Hezbollah, hundreds of thousands, but we know that there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of more sophisticated rockets in Gaza. And so you can only imagine what would happen, what will happen if one rocket is exploded somewhere in the Tel Aviv vicinity. But with that being said, the Israelis still grieve over the fact that they're waiting for one more, catastrophe, a rocket launched into Tel Aviv before they dramatically take care of this problem. If you were a member, or if you lived in Sderot, what would your feelings be about that? What about us? These rockets are coming to us all the time, and we really don't do anything about it. So once again, we look at the threats to Israel, to the north, and then also to from Gaza from the west. We mentioned the Serbian embassy move. It was announced on Friday that Serbia would be the next to move its embassy to Israel. Looking at the summer of next year, you can read that article. And then Kosovo's come on. Last Friday, President Trump announced that not only Serbia, but Kosovo will normalize its economic ties, upgrade its relations with Israel. And Trump said that both of these countries will move their embassies to Jerusalem next year. I've already mentioned Chad itself. And in response to all of this, the so-called neutral European Union has warned both Serbia and Kosovo that if they relocate their embassies to Jerusalem, it could undermine their membership in the European Union. So much for that so-called neutrality. And then more threats from Iran. This week, Iran has threatened America, saying that you are now within our range of Iranian bombs. By sending their military satellites into space, Iran is now showing that it can target all American territories. The Iranian parliament had previously warned that the U.S., they're threatening an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse nuclear attack, believing that it will likely take care of, or let's put it as it is, kill over 90% of Americans. And so this threat is real. An EMP, and the question is always going to be red lines. What's the red lines in terms of Israel and Iran? And now what's the red lines between Trump and Iran? Because we've just got the report from the UN nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, and they've stated that Iran has now crossed the uranium enrichment red line. They basically reported that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium now stands at more than 10 times the limit that was set down in 2015 with that so-called nuclear deal with the world powers. 10 times more. Where's the red line? What's going to happen? Again, I can see I just passed that 10-minute mark so quickly. COVID in Israel. In recent days, Israel has broken all records for the number of COVID diagnoses, sending shockwaves through the country. Our friends basically say it's a hot mess there. And it's shockwaves from Bibi down to the heads of COVID hospital works. But you're beginning to see that same dilemma as we face here. Are the facts true? Are the facts true? Are they being skewed one way or another? That enters into politics. And of course, now we have both Lieberman and Bennett, one calling for civil disobedience, the other calling for radical transformation of government. So again, all related back to COVID. We track that with our Holy Ground Explorations Ministry, and we usually report on that each week. Well, three things to end. Friends of ours at a law firm in Israel, Sharat Hadim, they've represented the three boys that were killed back in 2014. The families of these three boys, a civil lawsuit filed against Hamas for $520 million, or shekels, I should say, in a wrongful death compensation. The bottom line is that they are suing Hamas in order to keep monies that are given to the families of these terrorists for the murdering of these three teenage boys. You can read the rest of that article. And then, did you know that it's 48 years ago, September 6, 1972, was the massacre in Munich. And I want to remember, I read this article, I want you to remember this name, Joseph Romero. We remember, and may his name be a blessing. This was a weightlifter, a heroic deed given as he tried to save his fellow Olympians there. He grabbed one of the gunmen. He actually wrestled the gun away from him and then was reportedly shot and then tortured in front of his teammates, again, as being a warning to others who might try to do something. We know the bottom line of all that. But again, in these days where certain athletes are flashed out and they've been given a soapbox to speak from, I want us to remember a true hero. We remember, and may his name be blessed. And then finally wrapping up, it appears that President Trump has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and it'll be interesting to see what takes place there. This is in regards to Israel and the United Arab Emirates signing a deal that normalizes these relationships. And so, again, in the world in which we live, where Trump's being blamed for something, here Trump is being applauded for something. Last up is an image for you to take a look at. I call this perspectives, false perspectives, and I'm going to let you take a look at that. It's on slide number 15, and this is how the world's media portrays Israel and the Palestinians, and my response is to the right. With that, God bless, shalom, and we'll see you next week.